So now we're all set up and ready to go. We have this index HTML file, and I want to start talking about SVG. SVG stands for Scalable Vector Graphics. You are able to display different kinds of graphics, and because it's scalable and because it's vector, you can zoom in on it without losing quality. You can display it in many different sizes, and it's very easy to adapt it to your screen and to your browser. So those are the positive and the good things about it. But there are also drawbacks to using it, because I found out that it's pretty hard to work with in JavaScript and CSS because of styling problems, and it's not something you can't just add like a shadow and round corners as easily as you can with normal HTML elements. And with JavaScript, it's not totally easy just adding them directly to the DOM. Well, it's not that bad actually, but there are some things that you have to take care of. But let's first of all, let's just try and place some SVG into our HTML file here. We're not going to need the styles or the JavaScript just yet. I'm just going to close down the JavaScript at least. And first of all, I'm going to tell the HTML or the browser that we're working with SVG. So I'm just going to make an opening and closing tag for that. Oops, that was a little bit too much here. Let's just delete the last one. Okay, and in between here, before I do anything, I want to put some attributes on this one, because we have to tell the browser that we're actually working with SVG and give it a view box and stuff like that. But more on this actually right now. So first of all, I just want to give it a width of 100%, so it always spans the full browser window. So I could just put that in here, and it's just like a normal HTML attribute. So 100% here. And the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to add a version. And that's something you have to do with the SVG, so the browser knows which version of SVG it is. This is going to be 1.1. Then we're going to add some other stuff here. I'm not really sure what it does, but it tells you the standard. I think it tells the browser the standard of what we're dealing with here, the SVG. So I'm going to go XMLNS is going to be equal to this thing that I'm going to paste in just a second. Boom. And the next thing we're going to do is, actually, I'm just going to paste that in as well. And this is just a standard thing that you have to do when you create an SVG, when you initialize it, if you will. So let's just close this down so we can see the whole line. So this is what it looks like right now. And this should almost be enough to get going. But also we need to display a view box. You can explain it as the thing that you see, the size of the window of the SVG. You just give it some coordinates, actually. Let me show you. So view box equal, if I say 0, 0, that means that this is an X coordinate and this is a Y coordinate. So we want it to start in the left corner, 0 and 0. And then we want the width and the height as well. So the first one here is the width. I happen to know that I'm going to make 2 octaves on this piano just to explain it to you guys. And 1 octave is 560. So it's going to be 2 octaves, which is going to equal 1120. So that's the first thing I'm going to do. And I also happen to know that I want to make it 400 pixels high. So that's how you set that up. If I save this, we're not going to be able to see anything in the browser. Let me show you. But if I open up the console and we go to our elements, you can see that inside our body, we should have, I'm just going to close this down. We should have an SVG here. And you can see how big it is. You can see it has all the same attributes here, and it's this size here. So now you can see it's filling up the whole window here, and it does that because it's 100% wide. It will start from 0, 0, like the X coordinate and the Y coordinate, and then it's going to show 1120 pixels, the width, and then 400 pixels height. It can be a little bit difficult to understand this, so I'm going to leave a link in the description where you can read some more about SVG and the view box and what it actually does, because it can be a bit confusing. Hopefully during this tutorial we will be able to play around with it and hopefully understand better. But so far so good. Let's go back to our SVG here. And I am just going to, I'm going to zoom out a little bit. I hope you can still see what's going on. Because inside here, I want to make a group. And the way you make a group inside SVG is actually just with the G tag like this. So I'm going to make an opening and a closing G tag. And I'm gonna give it a class of octave because we want to make an octave first. So we can add classes to SVG elements just like normal HTML elements, and some of the stuff we can actually style from CSS, but not all of it. So octave, class of octave. Okay, so inside of this octave, of course, we're gonna have some keys, and what a better way to make keys. Like, keys are pretty rectangular, so let's make some rectangles. And the way to make rectangles, that is with the RECT for rectangle. And we have to have an opening and a closing tag as well. We can also put a class on this one. I'm not gonna do that right now. I'm just gonna add a stroke to it. So let's take a stroke and make it, give it a color. Let's give it a hex color of 555555 and a fill, so these are different words, that you use in CSS. Stroke, that will be a border, and a fill, that will probably, if you want to change the color of an element, you would probably use background color. But here we use fill, and I'm gonna fill it with FF7, just so it's not totally white. No, be an FFF. How many do we have here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's better. Good. Okay. And then I can try to save this, and let's go back and have a look. And I can't really see anything yet because I haven't given it a width and a height. So we yet don't know how big it is. But let's try and do that in just a moment here. But first, I want to start from the left corner. So I'm going to give it a x coordinate, and that's just by using the x attribute. And of course, that's going to be 0, and then a y coordinate, and that's going to be 0 as well. So now we know where it's going to begin. And then, as I talked about before, we need a width and a height. So I'm going to add that here, and the width is going to be 80, and the height is going to be 400, just like the height up here. And if you are thinking like I'm thinking, we have the width already. So when we have 7 white keys in one octave, 7 times 80 is 560. And then when you multiply that by 2, you get 1120, if I'm not off. So the height is going to be 400, just like the whole SVG. We set it to be right here. Okay, so now we have the first one. Let's see what's happening. Okay, we got something going on here. One white key here. It's placed right there in the corner, and it's filling up the whole thing because we only have one. So that's awesome. When we add more, it's going to adapt to the width of the page because we set it to be 100% here. So we're going to need a bunch more of these rectangles here. We're actually going to need 7 for every single octave. But before, I just want to add a class to it because we want to be able to actually target these keys through the CSS later on. I'm going to give it a class of piano key, and it's also going to have a class of white key because that is a white key. So we can target that later in our CSS, but not for now. Just don't worry about that for now. So now I'm going to paste in some more of these and the rest of the white keys. And I'm going to explain. So here we go. Let's just clean this up a little bit. And what you can already see, we only have the white keys here. And they basically look the same. They have the same stroke color and the same fill color. But and they have the same width and height. But you can see the difference here. So this first one starts in 0 on the x-axis. The next one will start on 80. The next one on 160. And the next one on 240. And that's because they have a width of 80. So when you add 80 to 0, you get 80. When you add 80 to 80, you get 160, and then 240, 320, and so on. We still want them all to be all the way on the top. So that will be 0 on the x-axis. So if I save this here and I go back, you can see now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 white keys. And that's what we need. Let's just say that it starts on a C. So we have C, D, E, F, G, A, and B. And then we'll start over on a C again here. Of course, we'll also need the black keys. And that kind of works in the same way. Let me try to make the first one. We're going to make it just after all of the white keys. We're not going to make like first we have a white key and then we place a black key after that. So that will be a C sharp. And then we place a white key that is D. And then we're going to place a black key that is D sharp. No, we're just going to place all of the white keys first, and then we will place the black keys, because it doesn't really matter which order they come in. And I think it's easier to figure out what's going on if we have all the white keys first and then all the black keys after that. And also it's, you can see here you have the position X and Y here. So we can just put those positions on the black keys and place them exactly where we want. So let's try and do that. I'm gonna make another rectangle here, and it's gonna have the closing off, and I'm gonna give that a class as well of piano key. So class equals piano key, just like the white keys. And of course this is not a white key, so it's gonna be a black key. Okay, then we are also going to have a stroke on this, but it's going to be a different color this time. It's going to be 979797. We're also going to have a different fill. That's going to be 4B, 4B, 4B. Then we are, of course, going to give it a width and a height. I'm going to do that later on. It's going to have a smaller height, but it's going to have the half width of whatever a white key is. So actually, let's do that first. Let's put a width on it, if I can spell that. And because we want them to be half the size of a white key, we are going to make it 40 as opposed to 80, which a white key is. We're going to give it a height, and the height is going to be 250. So that's a little bit more than half of the 400, which a white key is. So 250. And this is something I experimented with. It's not like it's totally perfectly proportions to the white keys. It's just something that I thought looks good. But we'll see it in just a moment, because we also have to add the X and Y positions. And we also want all of the Y's to be on the top, or I mean, we also want the black keys to be on the top. So we can just start with given the Y position of 0, like this. But the X position is going to be a little bit different. So X will be equal to the first one. We want to place it 60 on the X-axis. And let's just try and see what this looks like. And 60 is because, you know, you can calculate that. You can see it's actually placed exactly on the middle between the two white keys. So that is what we're going to do. I'm going to take this and I'm going to copy it. We need 5 black keys within an octave, so I'm going to paste it 4 more times. And so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, and then another 1 more time here. If I save that and go back, you can see that they're all in the same place. We actually have more than one. So if you take a look at the octave here, we have all of these black keys on top. They're just placed on top of each other. But let's space them out a little bit so it looks like a piano. And the way to do that is actually just changing the X position here. So we're gonna need the next one. It's the first one is 60, as we talked about. The next one is gonna be 140. So that means you add 80 to it, because you have the width of one white key, which is 80. So if you add 80 to 60, you're gonna get 140. So let's see if that works. Yep, we already scooched it over a little bit here, so you can see. But the next one, we're gonna have to change this, skip this one, because this is a C. Let's just say that we start on a C here. So this is C, D, E, and then you have an F here, and then you don't have a black key between the E and the F. That's just how it is. We can't change that. So the next one we're placing is going to be, we're not only going to add 80 to 140, we are going to add 160, because that's twice as much as 80, and we want to move it 2 white keys, the space of 2 white keys. So 140 plus 160 will be 300 on the X-axis. And the next one is going to be 380, because we're gonna add 80 pixels to that. And then the last final one is going to be 460. I hope this all makes sense. When I save this and we go back to the browser, you will see 1 octave of a piano keyboard. We can see that we have some problems with the margins and padding of the document here. Let's just go ahead and remove that really quickly at the styles.css. I'm just going to select everything here, and we're going to set a margin 0 and a padding 0 as well. And then go back to the browser and have a look. Now you can see it's all the way at the top. And also, if I resize the window, you can see that it actually it scales. So that's nice. The reason that we only have one here is because we set the view box, as we talked about earlier, all the way up here in our index.html and in our SVG tag. We set the viewport, or sorry, the view box to be in 1120. Let's try and have that to 560 because that is what 7 times 80 is. If I go back here, then you can see we actually only have the one octave here. And it's so big that it's hard to see what it even is, you know, but it's there. So because I'm going to take this octave we just created and copy it, let's keep the 1120 because then we can just go ahead and we can take this class of octave here and we can place it just right underneath here and save. And then we can go back and say, uh-oh, we only have one octave still. And why is that? Let's go to the console and look one more time. In the console, you can see we actually do have two octaves. In the elements here, if I open up SVG, you can see I have this octave and this octave, but it's just placed on top of each other. So octave number 1 and octave number 2 was just octave number 2 is just covering octave number 1. So now that we already know that an octave is 560, half of 1120, we can just add a transform on this, just like you know from CSS. You can add a transform is equal to translate, and then we can move it over by 560. So 560, and we don't want to do anything on the y-axis, and that will take, this one will still be as default, it's going to be placed on 0, 0. And this one, we're just going to take this one and move it over 560 on the x-axis only, not the y-axis. So when I save this and go back, nothing happened. And that is probably because I'm missing an S here. So let's add that and save again and then go back. And now you can see it is here. We have two octaves. And yep, that's how it works, ladies and gentlemen. If we go back here and we change this to 560, we will only have one octave, even though it is still there to the right of it, but we are only showing the portion of 560. If we, let's try just 800 or something like that, just so you can get an idea of how this works, then we're actually showing a bigger portion of it. So we can control that, and it's important that we control this view box. If we add more keys, if we add more octaves, we have to calculate what the total width is so we can show all of them at the same time. But let's just go back to 1120 and save that. And just for fun, let's add another one. Let's add another group with the class name of octave. And this time we're going to have have twice. So that will be 1120. So if I add that, we're not going to see anything because our view box is still not big enough. So if we have 3 octaves, we have to add 560 to this one here, and that will be 1680 if I'm not mistaken. So that's correct. Now we have 3 octaves. So that's how I figured out how to do this first, just adding a group, an octave at a time. That's going to pose a problem later on because I don't want us only to be able to start on a C and end on a B and then start over on a C. I want us to be able to start on any key and end on any key, but more on that later in a later video. Let's actually, I added some classes here because we don't really want all the strokes and the fills here. We want to move that to the style CSS. So if we want to change the color of the whole piano to a different color, we can go ahead and do that one place instead of having to change it everywhere here. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to remove all of this right here. Start here and just delete this whole thing here and do the same for the next one. And the last octave. And I do this by holding down Shift and Option at the same time, at least on my Mac, so I can select more lines at the same time in Visual Studio Code. I'm gonna save that in the browser. It's gonna look weird. They're all gonna be black. So let's figure out what we can do about that. In the style CSS, after the reset we made here, we are going to target the white key. And we're going to give it a stroke of the same color as before, and that's just 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. And a fill of, that's just going to be almost white, so that's FF, F7, so it's not completely white. And we're going to take the black key and do something similar, but different colors. It's going to be strokes, going to be 979797, and the fill will be 4B, 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 just like this. Now we can go back. Of course, remember to save, and we're back to where we started. But now we don't have all of the fill and stroke attributes directly on the elements here. So now that we know how to work with SVG directly in the HTML, or at least a little bit of it, then let's try to add some JavaScript that will actually output this dynamically. So I'm going to go to my files and open up the app.js. So in here, it would be nice to have some variables about number of octaves and what the width is and of an octave and things like that, so we can calculate it on the fly. So I'm going to create a variable called, let me just zoom in so it's easier to see, number of octaves. And we have 3 octaves here. That's the next one. I want the width of 1 octave, and that will be 80 times 7. So I can say let octave width, actually I'm just going to put it in a const instead, because that's probably not going to change. Maybe it is, I don't know. So octave width, this is just to give you an example of what we can do, how we can do it in an easy way. That's 560. And then let's take this whole piano SVG and actually just put it in a variable. So let's create a constant called piano SVG. So this is what I want to paste in here, and I'm just going to explain it to you. I'm using backticks because then I can use the ES6, the JavaScript ES6 template strings, which means this is just a string, and then I can inject a calculation here, a number, and this is the view box. And as you saw before, we changed the size of the view box here on the SVG, because if we have 1 octave, it's going to be different than if you have 2 or 3 or however many octaves we're going to have. So basically what I'm just doing, I'm taking this whole SVG thing, and I am creating that, and then I'm going to make this group with an ID of piano keyboard. We don't have an ID on the piano keyboard here, but that's just another group where we're going to have all of our octaves in, so we can add those, so we can get a hold of that element and we can add some octaves to it. So that now that has been taken care of, we have, it's the same. The width is 100%. We're going to start on the 0x and 0y, and then we're going to have it, this width here, it's going to be the number of octaves and multiplied by the octave width. And then we know that we only want it to be 400 pixels high to begin with. And then we have all of these weird things, the standard things. And then we have this group of ID piano keyboard that we're going to add it to. I'm going to save this, and I'm not going to do anything to the HTML just yet. Or actually I am. I'm going to add a div with an ID of piano here, because that's where we are going to add it to. So all the way up here, just a normal div with the ID of piano, because that's where we are going to add the SVG to. So that's just going to be empty for now, just so we can grab it in our app.js file. The next thing I'm going to make is another constant, and I'm just going to call it an octave keys, like octave keys. And that's going to be equal to another one of these strings here. It's just going to be a string. I'm just going to paste it in because it's exactly the same as what we have in our index HTML. It's just an octave. It's just, this is exactly what it is. So yeah, I'm just going to save that, and then we're going to use that in just a moment. And first of all, we're just going to get the piano div that we created here, this one. And the way to do that here is we're going to put it in a constant, just call it piano. And we're going to query the document, query selector, and we gave it an ID of of piano. So now we have that. Now we can add something to that. And then we're going to put the piano SVG inside of this. So we're going to go piano inner HTML, which will put this stuff up here inside of that piano that we just created here, or that we just created right here. And we're going to set that equal to, of course, you guessed it, piano SVG. Whoops, like this. So now we're going to add that. Okay. So let's save this and see if something is going on in the browser. I don't think so. Well, we added something up here, but there's nothing inside of it yet. So this is the old one we have. Let's just keep that for a moment. And let's go back to the code again. So the next thing we want to do here, we want to get the SVG group. So this one here, let's get this one. So that's another constant. Let's call it piano keyboard. And that's going to be document query selector. And it had an ID, or actually it had a class, no, an ID of piano keyboard. And oh, that's amazing. Like this. Okay, so now we got that. And then I just want to create the keys or the octaves in here. So with a simple for loop, we are going to try and do that. So I'm just going to start with I and start from 0 as we usually do. And as long as I is less than the number of octaves. So it's going to run once for every single octave. We set that up here. We have 3 octaves in this one. And then we are going to increment I. So inside our for loop, we want to create an element here. We're just going to call it octave. So const octave. That's going to be equal to, we're going to create an element here. And as you know, if you've watched some of my other videos, you can do that by going to the document and create element. And what kind of element do we want to create? Well, we want to create a group, right? So a G. So that's going to be like this, okay? Because that is what that's what we used here. We used the G as the group, and we want to add an octave within the group. And that should be good enough. But we also want to add an octave to every single one of these because we have a class of octave. Maybe we're going to use that later. So I'm going to take the octave and I'm going to add to the class list. So class list dot add, and we're going to add octave to that. Then we're going to have to move it across because we don't want to put them all on the X and Y position 0, 0. So we're going to take octave and we're going to set an attribute on this. So that's of course going to be the transform translate that we put. So set attribute, and that is going to be a transform. And we're going to add translate in backtick. So I'm going to add translate. And then like this, just after this parenthesis, we want to put in a variable. This is the way we do that because we are using template strings. I want it to be I times octave width. So that's 560. So times octave width. So the first time we run this, I will be 0. So 0 times 560, which we set up here, that's going to be 0. So we know it's going to start on the x-axis on the 0. And the next time, 1 times the width, 560 is going to be 560, and then so on. Then 2 times it's going to be double. So that's the way we're going to move the octaves over one by one. And after that, we just want to set here we want to set it to 0 because that is the y-axis. We want it to be exactly the same place everywhere. And then we grab the octave and then we put the whole octave inside the octave keys that we just created up above here. So that's going to be octave inner HTML is going to be equal to this one here that we created. So we're going to put that inside. And then I think we are ready to just take the piano keyboard that we created. here. That is the query selector piano keyboard. I think I forgot something here. It's actually with an ID, so I need to put this on, otherwise we're gonna get an error, I think. So let's take the piano keyboard and then just add append child. So we're gonna add these children we just created, the octaves, and append it to the piano keyboard. Okay, let's see what happens here. I'm gonna save that and go back to the browser, and we have absolutely nothing here. And why is that? That's kind of strange, I think, because if we take a look at our code in this one right here, we can see we have an SVG, and this is the SVG. We also have a div with ID piano, but there's nothing inside. It doesn't look like there's anything in there. Maybe I grabbed this one, but there's something weird going on here. And I can see there's an error here. Okay, that's because I forgot to say I'm gonna set it equal to 0. That makes better sense. Let's try and just save this one more time and go back, and then we can see there's still nothing, but there's something. There's something up here, but it doesn't show anything. And that's kind of weird. Let's look at in the elements here in the console, or in the elements tab. Inside the body, we have a div with an ID of piano. We also have this one, what we just created before. But inside this div of piano, we actually do have an SVG, and it has all the properties that we want. We have the same width for the view box, and we have a group of this in here. We have 3 octaves, and oh, we have a problem, not a number here. We have to take care of that as well. Let's have a look at what we can do here. That's because we have to say octave width here, because that's what it's called up here, 560. Let's go back and just have a look. Now we don't have that error. We can translate, transform, and it looks like it is how we want it, but we don't see anything. And that's a little trick here. That's because usually we're used to normal HTML elements that we can just grab them from the document, create them and add them and append them to another element that we grabbed. But in this case, we're not able to do that. We cannot just use create element. We have to use create element NS, because this is not a normal HTML element. So NS, that actually stands for namespace. So we have to give it a namespace. We have to tell the browser that now we're actually dealing with SVG. So the first argument we pass to this is this string here. That's just a URL for the W3 organization and the SVG standard stuff, So that's a way to tell the browser that now we're actually dealing with SVG. And then the second argument we pass is the element we want to create. So that's a G tag inside the SVG. So let's save that and then go back to the browser, and we can see now we actually have something. We have 1 here. So that means we have an error. We can go to the console. We can see, okay, translate. Okay, we need transform. I think I forgot to put that in as well. But nevertheless, something is going on. Something is happening here. I'm just going to go back here, and I want to just delete this whole SVG here that we created in the beginning, just so we don't have too many confusing things going on. Now we have this. So we want to have 3 octaves. So I made a mistake here somewhere in the app.js. That's of course because I forgot to put a parenthesis here after the 0. So we don't have the closing parens. Now it should hopefully work. You're getting the honest version of this, seeing all my mistakes. Let's check it out. And now we have 3 octaves here. And then it should be easy to go and change the number of octaves that we want. So we can go back here and we can say, hey, we want 5 octaves. Gonna save that, go back. Now we have 5 octaves. And as you can see, it scales nicely like this. And if we go and look at the elements, we can see that now we have 5 times the width of the octave. So that's 2,800. So everything kind of works like that now. But we still have the problem that we want to do this a bit more dynamically. We want to set up a different way of doing this, so we don't have all of these long and boring static strings that just they look pretty messy. We're going to try to create these dynamically as well. But I think this video is long enough for now. So let's meet in the next video and continue doing that. See you there.